Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I hope the microphone is working. A very warm welcome to this event, which is taking place almost in the evening. So it's great to see such an amazing turnout in person, but also online. We're here to talk about Ukraine's road to EU membership. I think it's been a long and quite bumpy road, but we're definitely getting nearer the destination. I'm really honored and delighted to have with us today Olha Stefanishyna, the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. Welcome to you. It's nice to see you in person finally, rather than online. And also Gert Koopman, who's the Director General at DG NEAR in the European Commission. Thank you as well for joining us here today. I mean, the topic of today's conversation is quite simple. Ukraine was given 7 priorities to meet in June 2022 by the European Commission in order to hopefully get the green light to open accession negotiations at the end of the year. There is, in a few weeks' time, going to be an assessment, I think in mid-October, by the Commission, which I really hope very much. They'll say, yes, everything's done, excellent, A grade. You have the green light. I mean, it's always difficult to meet criteria, but of course, in Ukraine's situation, we have the full-blown Russian invasion of the country ongoing, which certainly doesn't make the situation easier. But Ukraine has made very good progress so far. The oral assessment in June, if my memory serves me correct, assessed that 2 of the priorities had been fully filled, and the other ones were either partially filled or well on the way to being filled, which I think is great. So we want to look at today what's been done since where we are at, what remains to be done. So I would like to start actually asking you, Deputy Prime Minister, if you're able to give us an update and also maybe tell us about what you've been doing here in Brussels already. I mean, maybe it's obvious the purpose of your visit, but I know you've also been up at NATO because you also cover NATO. So perhaps give us some insights into that. And just for the audience, particularly for the journalists, there's going to be a special press briefing after this at 5 o'clock in a different meeting room. So I think if you have your very good questions, which I'm sure you do, you can save them until then. So I'll give the floor immediately to you, Deputy Prime Minister.
Is that working? Working. Okay. Good. It's done. Gertian. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, first of all, before I will start discussing anything related to the progress on the 7 criteria. All of that would not be possible without excellent cooperation with the European Commission throughout the way. It's not an easy process. Every time we hear from the European Commission, and particularly and especially from the member states, that you should suffer enough doing a very complicated stuff which lay the background of the way your country is functioning. So indeed, it's a very complicated process politically and etc. But we have been enjoying an excellent engagement at all levels with the European Commission and the dialogue throughout the way. It gives a lot of clarity to the process. It gives a lot of credibility to something which allows us to set the priority for the next periods. And of course, it helps us to mobilize and keep this political unity over the reforms. That's really important because, as you rightly said, I also covered the topic related to Euro-Atlantic integration and what is seemed to be a perfect normality in our relations with European Union is only to be set up following the Vilnius summit, and it's already just a long way to go, and we're not even yet there. So I think it's very important that these 7 criteria were born out of an assessment of Ukraine's progress over the whole period of independence, and particularly almost for 10 years of implementation of the association agreement. So, I think the very fact that there are only 7 elements which are needed to complete the understanding that Ukraine fully complies with the Copenhagen criteria in terms of rule of law and fundamental rights is very important. We have done a lot. We've gone through a very long process. The very important way that even the very fact that we were living and continue living in a momentum of the full-scale war, we have doubled our commitment in terms of the reformed agenda, because we understood that it's the not the front line, but it's the front of fight for Ukraine's future and for the way how Ukraine sees itself after the victory. And for us, it was extremely important that on 23rd of June, all 27 member states, not knowing how the war will evolve, have made a clear commitment that they will stand with Ukraine as long as it is needed, and the victory will be there. And after the victory, Ukraine becomes a member state of European Union. This is so far the most solid political commitment basically Ukraine has throughout all these 570 days of the full-scale war. So it's very much appreciated. That's why there's been a strong commitment on our side to make sure that we cannot let down the aspirations of Ukrainian people, but also of our partners. And we have completed a lot of work related to the legislative process and implementation process. And basically, following the oral report, it was confirmed that 2 out of 5 criteria have already been fulfilled, namely the area of judicial reform, covering everything related to completion and selection of the leaders of the judicial institution, and whole the set of issues related to the media freedom and the media market. These are the existential transformations, and we didn't stop our work in this area after the green light on commission from commission. So the judicial reform keeps on going. The institutions been established, they start operating, they financed, they are fully entrusted with all the functions that needed, and they are fully operational. The same is done with the media regulation. The law is enforced. The the independent regulator is there. It is established. It is operating. It presents drafts of legislation and regulations setting up the rules which established by the law. So it's like a never-ending process. At the same time, we've concentrated a lot on a number of issues related to fight against corruption and completing one of the most complicated topics, which was related to the relaunch of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. It has a very symbolic meaning in Ukraine, because basically just when President Zelensky became a president and the parliament has been formed, there still have been a group of former representatives of Yanukovych party who has submitted the claims to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court started to cancel one by one all reforms adopted since 2014. So we basically could have found ourselves in a situation of a 0 point the other day. So this was the issue of national security, and that's why this has arrived to be one of the recommendations of European Commission, and we have successfully passed the legislation, and we now are about to launch the competition for this new Constitutional Court. We expect that Venice Commission and the European colleagues and other colleagues, particularly American, would nominate international experts to ensure the transparency of the selection process. We have also found ourselves in a situation when these 7 recommendations has relaunched very complicated and controversial processes in Ukraine, like anti-oligarch legislation, which was a new phenomenon not only in Eastern Europe but generally in the narrative, and we had not very positive assessment of Venice Commission on the approach that this is like naming and shaming and the register of personalized approach. We have been working hard to find the solution, and in fact, Venice Commission has asked us to prioritize the systemic measures. And this is what we have done. And we also grateful to European Commission that really there's been a lot of understanding, discussion, and explanations throughout the process. And it really evolved in a very good results. First, we have passed legislation strengthening the Anti-Monopoly Committee. So, and the nomination of the new head of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, unfortunately for somebody, but fortunately for the reform of the competition law, we have restored the legislation on transparency of the political party financing and the declaration of the way how the party is operating. We will, by the way, Gert, register the law on lobbying rather soon, taking into account the comments from European colleagues. So these are all the tectonic transformations which probably would not happen throughout the war without these recommendations and all of this dialogue. And we know that it also affects other countries like Georgia and Moldova, who follow this lead and this experience, which is so far, I guess, more positive. We have really invested hard in areas related to fight against corruption. So pretty long period ago, in terms of our understanding, a couple of months ago, we have completed the setup of all anti-corruption institutions. They are fully financed, fully operational, with the selected in a transparent way, leaders, directors, prosecutor, and the court judge. It has become another front of fight in Ukraine. So institutions are fully operational. They show good results of their work. And that really puts a lot of, let's say, political impact to how politicians have to react on these cases, because there are many cases arriving here and there. We understand a number of things. That first, it shows that there is no impunity for the crimes, and there is no immunity from being traced and suspended, or even brought to justice for the crimes committed. And we have, as politicians, made our own anti-corruption track. So we always react to cases, and we try to take systemic measures. For example, if it comes to the military process, so if one case become public, we do the screening throughout all of the systems. So a number of resignations has been taking place, but there are still many things to go. But because when the system is operational, many things are opening up and more things to be done. So again, regardless the assessment of European Commission, this will be a, let's say, ongoing process. So it will not stop. It will only evolve. And what I say to my fellow political colleagues in Ukraine, we have not even started, because ahead of us is the accession process, and the fundamentals are the basic and the first area for the negotiations. So we have not even started with a real screening of that. So it's just the political things which has to be done. And there's a number of things which are, to our understanding, not clearly part of the 7 recommendations, but we think it's important to make this decision, like restoring the asset declarations of the officials. And it was principle for us to make it public. There was a huge public demand on that. So we hope the parliament will pass this legislation, and then we will work on making sure that this system is operational, trustworthy, etc. And we are also working on a number of improvements related to special anti-corruption prosecution, how they function, how they operate, but it's a longer run, let's say, commitment on our side to work on. But again, next week, talking to Gert, we will try to fine-tune, the right solutions and balance of the next steps to be done. But the most complicated thing for us, which has shown up to be complicated, is the area of national minorities, because it covers a huge amount of things, a very wide group of ethnic representations in Ukraine, more than 100. So we have to understand that across all the territory of Ukraine, including the occupied one. So it was rather complicated to ensure the proper inclusiveness and online dialogue on that. So we passed the legislation. We're now about to receive the follow-up opinion of the Venice Commission on the legislation taking into account its recommendations, and I hope it will be positive and we will be able to take account additional comments. And now, just as we are speaking, our delegation is working in Budapest, having consultations on educational process, and the same consultations are done with many other EU member states who raise this topic as well. And we really hope that while setting up specific political goals related to the accession talks or whatever at this point, we will be able to demonstrate the progress and the commitment, which will be enough at this stage. So as has been said a million times before, Ukraine is not lacking the commitment, and Ukraine is not to be seen as somebody who can let the partners down, and we're not in a position to do like that. But first and foremost, we are pressed and pushed and forced by Ukrainian society, by Ukrainian people, and by expectations that we will deliver to the extent that the leaders could again mobilize this unity and give this new impetus to move forward. As I've said many times before, and I'm not tired to again repeat that, these decisions have a crucial meaning for the unity within Ukraine, for the commitment and focusing on the reforms and transformations throughout the war. So I would not exaggerate if I say that what we do is vital, and what would colleagues from Brussels decide is vital as well.
Thank you very much for this great overview. I mean, Ukraine has done so much actually, and so quickly under such difficult circumstances. And, you know, for somebody that's worked on Ukraine for over 15 years, I know the commitment of all Ukrainians to European integration. I mean, it's been a long time goal and dream, and it's good to see that we're getting closer inch by inch. Of course, a lot depends on the side of the EU, but we will come to that in a second. But I just wanted to ask you, before I turn to Mr. Koopman, could you say something about the engagement of our actors in this process? I mean, civil society, for example, the roles that they're playing in this, and also the sort of outreach that you've been doing to member states, because at the end of the day, the Commission can give the green light, and hopefully they will, but it's up to member states to make this final political decision, and everybody wants Ukraine to succeed, and at the moment to become, you know, to start accession negotiations. But have you also been doing outreach in individual member states to sort of advocacy to push this goal?
Thank you so much. Indeed, this dialogue with member states is extremely important, and I think that over the last year, we built a very serious network of engagement with the member states. So throughout the Czech, the Swedish, and now Spanish presidency, we have a continued tradition of working with the ministers for European affairs. So there is a lot of personal and daily and rather regular engagement that I have the colleagues from different institutions in Ukraine and the office in the Cabinet of Ministers coordinating EU staff are doing. In fact, this Tuesday, I'm invited to deliver remarks on the General Affairs Council at the level of the Ministers for European and Foreign Affairs. And I think it's very important to have the first-hand information combined with the assessment of the Commission, being able to provide some details, comments, which are of individual interest of member states. As I referred, for example, on today's consultations with the Hungarian colleagues, we also put focus on dialogue with the specific partners to address the concerns. I think it's also very important to mention that issues related to European integration are the cross-political priority. So it's my president and the prime minister and the whole parliament is always putting it on the table of discussion and makes it able to address anything which may arise as a question. We always hear messages related to a broader transformation needs to proceed further with Ukraine's accession and generally with the enlargement process. And of course, we are trying to contribute to this dialogue to the extent we can. We understand that there is not only a decision taken on Ukraine, which particularly should be taken for Ukraine to become a member of European Union. We see that this dialogue is evolving. We have been very closely following the remarks of President von der Leyen over her address on the State of the Union, and Charles Michel's President of the European Council remarks on 2030 timelines for the enlargement. So there is a much broader discourse. So that's why we're not trying to be over ambitious. We have chosen the track of showing showing, doing, committing ourselves and making sure that there's always at every moment a ability to take the political decision, and Ukraine lays the background for that.
I'll come to you, Mr. Koopman. Now, I certainly don't want to put you into a head-to-head, making an evaluation or assessment over what the Deputy Prime Minister has said. But I'd like to hear from you what you think, should be the next steps for Ukraine to focus on. Most crucially, what advice would you give to Ukraine now?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's indeed a little bit awkward to sit here with Olga discussing this theme in front of a wide audience. So as you kindly invited me to discuss this subject, but not to enter into the detail, I obviously will not do that, and I cannot do that because the Commission will draw up its assessment in its enlargement report and make the necessary recommendations next month. But maybe I would like to start by thanking Olga on behalf really of the entire Commission for all the hard work put into this process. And it's really, a testimony to the government, to the President's commitment to the European path to see how much has been achieved in very, very difficult circumstances. So it is clear there is a huge commitment. And also from our side, we have been very clear that we would very much like Ukraine to join. Ukraine belongs to the European family, and that is also something which is in our interest. So, the conditions for this work are very good in this sense. Now, having said that, obviously, we also need to ensure that the process is rigorous. And that is actually not just in the interest of the EU, it's also in Ukraine's interest, and Olga and I have discussed that often, so we see eye to eye on it. We need to also do that because there are other countries with whom we are negotiating, and everyone is watching everyone. And if we take, for example, the anti-oligarch legislation, this is an issue which is pertinent to all three countries in the trio, as it is called, so Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, where exactly the same issues arise. So the Commission's hallmark in these negotiations is to ensure equality of treatment, consistency, and rigor. And that means sometimes the discussions are difficult, but if they are difficult, it is for the best of the countries concerned and the best of the Union as well. So you have seen our oral update where we said that significant progress had already been achieved and that 2 of the 7 steps had been completed. Since then, as Olga has explained, a lot of further progress was made. She has also communicated that the work isn't done yet. And now time is of the essence. So my basic message is that the country should really pull out all the stops to finalize the work on the steps. And it's encouraging to hear even today that there are new laws being registered in the Rada and the Parliament. So that is very positive. I think that this is the start of a process where if we can open the negotiations, then obviously, there is still a lot of change that needs to happen. Enlargement is transformational. It really changes entirely the legal corpus. And if we look back at the 2004 enlargement, then we just see how successful it has been. And we unfortunately don't talk enough about it, but many of the countries who came in 2004 are actually very prosperous nowadays, and some of them are actually more prosperous than the average EU member state. So it shows that enlargement can have this transformational effect. And what is more, it also benefits greatly the other member states. So I keep reminding everyone that enlargement is not a zero-sum game. It's a positive-sum game. It's in the interest of everyone to get this right. But when I say get it right, I really mean get it right. It can also bring challenges to the Union. So that is really where we are. We will be having further discussions in private. I hope that all efforts will be made. I think it is natural with such transformational processes that vested interests fight back. That's a natural phenomenon, and we see some of that happening in all of the countries with whom we are having discussions, and that will need to be overcome. Otherwise, the process will be very difficult. But all in all, I must say that the country is writing history. What is at stake is far bigger than in previous enlargements, I think, and therefore it is our duty really to make this a success. And that is very much the perspective which our president has also highlighted again in the State of the Union earlier this week. Thank you.
I'd like to say with the issue of challenges to be overcome, because yes, Ukraine has challenges to be overcome, but so does the EU. I mean, Ukraine needs to get fit, if I can put it that way, to join the EU, but at the same time, the EU actually needs to get fit, maybe like a dietitian and go on a diet and be ready to absorb new members. I mean, there's been a lot of, let's say, loud statements about how enlargement's back on track, new momentum, etc. And of course, we know there's this new geopolitical momentum which is out there. But I'd like to, hear your insights on where you think the EU is at in actually being ready to carry out the necessary reforms that will actually be crucial to make the policy fit for purpose. Because we've heard a lot about phased integration or other terminologies along these lines, and this is all very good, but it doesn't actually address the key issues that are problematic within the enlargement policy. I mean, we all remember prior to, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I mean, enlargement policy had ground to a halt. Now, we recognize this was a mistake, or the EU does, but it's really I mean, I know you work in the Commission, but do you see a real genuine intention from member states to really reform, the budget, agricultural policy, change the way that voting is done to make the EU more functional and ready to have new countries in it?
Well, let me start by saying that ultimately all of this depends on political will. And I think the first order observation is that now all countries really see the importance of enlargement, and there has been a huge change in many capitals. Some capitals I know particularly well, where there has been a lot of reluctance about enlargement. And this is really the thing that actually is the most important observation. Secondly, yes, the EU will also need to change and evolve, as it has always evolved. But I would like to say that the debate about absorption capacity, as it is called in this stan, which is a horrible, you will have to get used to these horrible euphemisms, qualifiers. I think that debate we need to look at very carefully, because it could easily be misconstrued to pretend that enlargement cannot be done. In fact, many colleagues would have thought that at 27 we would never be able, given the decision-making rules, to deal with the COVID crisis, to procure vaccines. And actually, in my previous function, when I was Director General of the Budget, we changed the 7-year budget, which is a unanimous decision requiring consent also of the Parliament. We managed to do that in 7 days when we ran out of money and we needed to buy vaccines, because that was actually existential. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, reforms are going to be necessary, but I would not make the enlargement process at this juncture conditional on that, because the reality is that we have always managed within the frameworks to find accommodations for these problems. And if we look at Ukraine and the other countries that might join, we have to realize that we're talking about 16% of the EU 27 population. So relatively speaking, that is actually much smaller than the 2004 enlargement. We also see that these are countries that potentially could grow economically rather dramatically before they become a member state. And this is the other work stream we have with Ukraine, namely to work on reconstruction. I mean, I'm really impressed, I say that quite openly as an economist and as someone who has worked with many countries over the past decades, with the potential and the interests of the country in modernizing. And if we succeed that in the coming years, and the country could get back on its feet and grow fast, we're in a very different world. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, there are challenges. There have always been challenges, but they are certainly not insurmountable. And I'm very confident that solutions will be found when they have to be found. I would, as our president also said, be very careful not to start a huge debate about treaty change. Treaty change is not a prerequisite, for enlargement. Changes are a prerequisite, but we have oftentimes been very good at making changes when it really matters. Thank you.
Maybe I can ask you also to comment on this same issue. I mean, your expectations from the EU in terms of its ability to, get itself ready for Ukraine and other countries. I mean, I agree with you that Ukraine will be a huge asset actually to the EU for many, many different reasons, and I have always held that idea. But also in terms of this phased integration, where do you see this happening in the near future in different areas? Where would you like to see that happen between Ukraine and the EU, to, let's say, bring the two together before you would actually accede, if that makes sense?
Thank you so much. Probably only 3 points from me. First and foremost, many things we know about EU, but with the beginning of full-scale war, we see that EU is extremely adjustable and capable of addressing the challenges and making the decisions which allow to evolve stronger. This has been this even seemed to be normal over the COVID times. Again, I remember all of this discourse about the vaccine and the procurement and the and addressing, but this seems to be like normal. But in with the beginning of war in the middle of Europe, with one of the biggest armies in the world attacking Ukraine, EU doesn't seem to be the major player to step up. I mean, and build the capacity for the decision-making process. But it is EU who has made a decision first ever in its history, as regards not its member state, but the third country, to finance military support. And this policy has become sustainable. It evolved and it will be evolving. And now it's evolving in a broader discourse on the defense sovereignty of European Union. This is huge, and that's why we do not really raise any concerns about the ability of EU to adjust to the challenges related to enlargement and the opportunities related to that. This will happen. We will find the way. EU will definitely find the way. The thing important here that the commitment is solid. Just 4 years ago, when I was in Paris, I heard that enlargement, nothing about Ukraine. Everybody loves Ukraine. We support your European aspirations, etc. But enlargement generally was the taboo topic. It was not a subject for discussion. There were no vision for that. And here we are speaking about the reform of EU and its ability to enlarge, and this solid commitment is there, then there will be a way. We are also extremely adjustable, and we will be able not only to adjust to this transformation, but also to help and to support it in every way we can. So the second point is that it's really important to see how this narrative is evolving from the Ukrainian perspective. 30 years, probably a bit less, Russia has spent enormous resources to raise the propaganda about the European course of Ukraine. In 2014, we had the Revolution of Dignity, where people were coming out on the streets for the European choice of Ukraine. And prior to this day, we had the blossom of the Russian propaganda saying that the European Union is trying to absorb Ukraine, it will leave us without sovereignty, and etc. So trying to make all of this discourse negative we should be really cautious, because in fact it is not so. And what Gert says, it's very much resonates to me. It's very easy to get into this negative thinking, you know, that these are the challenging process. For EU, it is not. I don't think what could be challenging for EU after all we did together, I mean, over this 570 days and even before that. So we should be really cautious about building a negative and concerning raising narrative about that. For Ukraine, it's already a lessons learned, and it's very dangerous. And the third thing, and I think that this brings me to even more optimistic thing. I know Gert not for a long time, and he's far from a person trying to build, you know, the castles from the sand or from the wind. He is a very pragmatic and skilled and experienced senior official of European Commission, and basically having the messages like that from him is also very important, because there is a common understanding and the general understanding of that. So I'm really positive. We are, as Ukrainians, are ready to contribute to any discourse. We know that European Policy Center and many other think tanks across the Europe build the ideas and proposals, and we're also ready to contribute with that. But I guess this, comparing to what we faced over the years before, transformation of European Union related to enlargement doesn't seem to be a big challenge at all, in fact, from Ukrainian perspective.
Yeah, and it also gives me an opportunity to promote a new EPC initiative, because we're actually launching an enlargement task force in the next weeks that will carry out events, publications, and whatnot right up until the future, the European Parliament elections, which will be addressing all of these issues, and to which Ukraine, the other candidates in the Western Balkans, we want to bring everybody together to discuss these issues. But enough from me. I want to turn now to the audience, who've been very patient for questions. My colleague Jana has the microphone. She will be coming around. If you can give your name and where you are from. We have like 15 minutes. So who wants to go first?
Thank you for the floor. Dmytro Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. My question is just about the simple way of EU to enlargement. The current situation on the grain market just raises very sensitive issues, particularly in European market and its relations with Ukraine. So I will not ask you about that situation because it's a huge topic itself. But my question to Mr. Koopman, what is your vision on the future of European market development? Then not just Ukraine, but also Balkan states, Georgia and Moldova will become the full-fledged members of EU. And the related question to Olga, if I may, what is the measure of the compromise Ukraine could afford to curb its own huge potential, obviously, in agriculture and industry, to give to EU countries enough time to adapt themselves for such new events? Thank you.
Okay, so let me say that the internal market is the economic flywheel of the EU. And in fact, we have very clearly communicated that not only Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, for that matter, but also the Western Balkans should benefit from it more before they're members. So this whole debate about staged accession is a very theoretical debate. I'm a very practical person. As an economist, I see this extremely positively because this is our own experience in the EU. It's our internal market that has made us so prosperous. And it makes sense for us to integrate new member states progressively in that internal market. That is happening. It's already available. And yes, sometimes it causes challenges, and I don't want to go into those challenges, but it shows it's real. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had these debates. So also for the Western Balkans, our president has announced a growth initiative that, as one of its elements, foresees regional integration in the Western Balkans and progressive integration in the internal market. To our Ukrainian friends, I think it's worth recalling that actually the DCFTA gives you more access potentially to the internal market than the Western Balkans have. So that is clearly something that we have to address. And I think it will make us economically much stronger. It will make you stronger. And by growing much faster, it will make all the problems people are so worried about today a lot easier to deal with. Because a lot of this analysis about, oh, you'll blow up the budget, you'll blow up the cap, you'll blow up cohesion policy, is based on looking at where the countries are today and extrapolating on that basis. I think that is fundamentally flawed. Your country could potentially be an economic superpower. It should be an economic superpower because if you're an economic superpower, the EU will be even stronger and all of our member states will benefit from it. So that is why I believe that the enlargement process and the reforms that come with it, which are hard, and the reconstruction process, which we're also taking forward, not on our own, but with our international partners and led, of course, by Ukraine itself. These two are linked. They are joined, as I often say, at the hip. If these two work in tandem, I see potentially very significant advances going forward that will change the terms of this debate progressively. So I think the priority has to be practical and make concrete progress over the next 1 or 2 years. Enlargement as a process in the Western Balkans in the past has been far too slow as far as I'm concerned. There is no political traction with a lot of citizens in the Western Balkans. That mistake we can absolutely not make in the East, and we have to repair it in the Western Balkans. And therefore, I think this whole debate about now making real progress concretely is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Probably I'll start by commenting on the smaller things and then come to the bigger ones. On the smaller ones is the current problems related to exporting the grain through 5 neighboring countries, and to these countries, these are like 4 groups of products. This is not the first, let's say, trade tensions we have with Poland. This has been throughout our history for a long period of time, but it's only now in a time of war it become so sensitive because it is about the grain. It is about the only possible physical routes of exportation that we have, and basically it's about like leaving Ukrainian agrarian sector with the no clarity in terms of what they will do tomorrow, and you know that they leave by a specific seasonal cycle. So that has a very specific emotional flair here. But I think the very important element is that we will manage to find the solution in this decision, and this solution would look as the agreement even before membership, so before the accession talks or throughout the accession talks. So it is already building the frame of Ukraine's place in the EU single market. There are a number of obvious things that Ukraine is agrarian country, and becoming a member of EU will not make us not the agri country. So it's obvious, and you cannot really change this fact. And based on this fact, the decision has already been taken that Ukraine is a member of EU. President von der Leyen has already announced that the agrarian policy of European Union needs to be reconsidered with the new generation of policy planning, and that would definitely take into account Ukraine. Speaking about the challenges, I've mentioned that. Speaking about the opportunities, we have to understand that, for example, EU is the largest trading partner of China, for example, and having Ukraine as part of the single market only increases this opportunity. A part of Ukraine, EU has a lot of free trade areas agreements, which makes gives Ukraine access to almost 1.5 billion of consumers around the globe. This is the access that we do not have right now. We have access, we have free trade areas with Britain, with Canada, with the EU, of course, but we get access to the whole world based on the rules and the authority and the credibility of European Union process. So this is fantastic, I would say, but the road to this nice access would be tough. And at this road, it's clear to us that there are some things which are not subjected to trade. It's the rules which should be common to everybody, from Lisbon to Warsaw, from Kyiv to Brussels, and these are the rules based on which the market is operating. The most complicated discourse would be about the competition and the balance and the place of Ukraine in the internal market. And in that regard, this is not that much about legal approximation and EU acquis. We have already started the self-screening. We know the scope. We will be discussing it with the European Commission later. There will be some reservations, transitional periods, and etc. But mostly it will be about the competition, and this is the real politics where we'll be having.
We have another question, Jana. Yeah, no. Okay, maybe I can. Oh, yes, we do. Yeah, Hennady, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gennady Maksaki, Ukrainian Prism. Good to see Madam Vice Prime Minister here, good friend of Ukrainian Society. I would like to address a very sensitive issue from my side. I just returned from Athens. There was a conference devoted to perspectives of EU accession for the Western Balkans. And the issue which was raised in the lobbies, there was that it's highly possible that there would be package approach from southern belt of EU, from member states, trying to push also some Western Balkan states to be part of the package of decision of European Council in December. From your point of view, could it be facilitating or complicating positive decision of open accession for Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think obviously enlargement as a policy is back, and that doesn't only pertain to Ukraine, it also pertains to the Western Balkans. Now, I don't see a similar gigantic step that is potentially going to be decided with regards to Ukraine and Moldova at this juncture in the Western Balkans. But there needs to be progress also in the Western Balkans. They need to accelerate. We need to accelerate. And this is why the Commission President has announced this growth plan. So if there is decision making in December, I hope it will be to endorse the principles of the growth plan, which will also give the Western Balkans a real perspective and break the pessimism which the citizens of the Western Balkans have about enlargement. You know, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia have a much higher percentage of citizens believing in the EU than people in the Western Balkans who have been involved with the enlargement process for 10 years. I know it's not Ukraine's main problem, but it's certainly something we should be concerned about in the EU. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah, is that somebody online? Okay, Jana, if it's there, can you just read it out, please?
Thank you. So we have a question from Ms. Pia Grippenberg, and the question goes to both speakers. If you have expectations when Ukraine could be a member state of the EU. Thank you.
We can only speak for ourselves and hope for a better. So we need, of course, to synchronize our assessments, but the readiness of Ukraine would be much faster than of the other countries. We have already gained a lot of experience with the implementation of the association agreement. So, and basically we have the institutional capacity, we have the deputy ministers for EU affairs in charge of everything from legal approximation to handling daily issues in every ministry of institutions, and we have fully committed parliament. And I think even the next parliament, when formed, will not be able to step back from this commitment. So when the conditions for the accession are set, Ukraine will be extremely fast to fulfill that, because we are working on that now.
I don't want to speculate on a date, but let me say, just to link up with what Olga has just said, that it's a merit-based process. So if the partner countries really want to go fast and can go fast and reform fast, then the process goes faster. I also, as I just said, I think the process itself needs to go faster. I think we have a very heavy process that can be accelerated without sacrificing the quality. Because you have to also see that from our perspective, having extremely well-prepared new member states joining is very important. We don't want countries that are not ready joining. That destabilizes the union. But if partner countries can go really fast and actually do the reforms very fast, then I think there is a prospect for joining fast.
Ukraine has a very good track record of doing things faster. I mean, as you mentioned with the, with the association agreement and DCFTA, when there's something very, good to be had at the end of it, they put the foot on the accelerator and do it. So personally, I feel very confident that Ukraine will do whatever it takes. I think, the EU also needs to be accelerating these processes. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. So I would like to thank both of you for joining us here today. To you, Deputy Prime Minister, for giving us your valuable insights. I really wish you all the best of luck in finishing this process, getting the green light from the Commission first, and then in December, the Council doing the right thing, because at the end of the day, this is a geostrategic priority. I mean, you mentioned the Big Bang enlargement of 2004. I mean, back then, all member states were on the same cadre because they all had the same vision for Europe, and they understood that it had to be a geostrategic priority to bring these countries in. And I think we're seeing that now. I don't think it happened in the same way with the Western Balkans, but that's a different story. So I do hope that will happen. Just again to advertise a bit the EPC, because that's also my task here. As I forgot to mention in the beginning, this event was part of our Ukraine's European Future program. I would invite everybody to look at it on our website. It's full of publications and events related to Ukraine, not just the accession process, but literally everything related to Ukraine, from military assistance to justice for Ukraine to the grain deal trade, etc. I would also like to flag up some events for next week. We actually have 3 events on Ukraine next week, 2 events on sanctions on Monday and Wednesday, and then a 3rd event assessing the situation on the battlefield and why the West needs to step up its support for Ukraine in military assistance and whatnot to get this victory done as soon as possible. So thanks to both of you very much for joining us. I hope to see you again very soon. And thanks to the audience. And it only remains for me to say, Slava Ukraini!